The Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Roerig. Hello, everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. This is episode 75 of the On Screen, and as is tradition here, that means advocates of great entertainment. We do this every 25 episodes. We celebrate how long we've been doing it. And this time we're going to be doing our 75th. We're going to be covering advocates.
The next advocates is going to be advocates of great advocates of television podcasts.
Yes, so. I'll be advocating for you, and you'll be advocating for Ed.
Yes.
Who used to be on the podcast. Yeah. Nobody will advocate for me.
Aww.
But before we get started with anything else, my name is Tyson. I'm your host.
My name is Will.
And today, as I just mentioned, we are going to be doing Advocates of Great Entertainment. We're going to be doing a repeat of what we did last year. Different movies we're covering, but we're going to be doing the Christmas movie thing again. We did that last year. It just so happened that our 75th episode lined up right around the season again. So we said, let's do it again. There's plenty of Christmas movies.
Yes, there's no shortage of Christmas movies.
So we said, fuck it, let's do it again. Let's do some more Christmas movies. And so that's what we're doing. Advocates of Great Entertainment Christmas movies too. We also have a few news stories to go over, some trailers, stuff like that. And we have a long, as far as like the time frame, but not as far as like how much is in there, segment for On the Horizon. And that's because we're going to be gone for like 4 weeks after this. We're coming back in the first week of January to record, but we're going to be gone for a while. So we have to cover, On the Horizon, we have to cover stuff coming up through that entire stretch rather than just like a week. So there's a little bit more, but not too much more. Like there's, because it's also the holiday season, so there's not a lot coming out. But let's get started with our news segment on Beat. On Beat. On Beat is, of course, our news segment. Our first story up, Mike Flanagan and Trevor Macy, who are like two of the top creators at Netflix. They did the Haunting of shows, I think it was Hill House and Bly Manor. They also did the Midnight Club, and there was another Midnight something they did before that. I don't remember which was. But anyways, they're top creators at Netflix. They've some of the highest rated stuff that Netflix has produced. Not anymore, because they are leaving Netflix for Amazon. They're leaving for, I believe the word would be greener pastures.
Yes.
And we know what that green is.
We know that's that Jeff Bezos money.
Yeah, that Jeff Bezos brand of green.
That Bezos bling.
Yeah. So yeah, they're going to be leaving Netflix for Amazon. Some people think this is like a huge shocking thing. I don't really think it's that big of a deal. The amount of content Netflix puts out is like astronomical.
Yeah, it's not like this is like a death blow for Netflix or anything. It's always awful to lose talented creators, but I mean, these things happen all the time.
Just frees up room for more talented creators,
Yeah, exactly.
And it's good for us as an audience because we're still going to be getting their projects somewhere,
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're like big fans of their work, it's not like they're not getting to do their thing anymore. They're still going to be doing their thing. They're just doing it over at Amazon instead of Netflix. So it's kind of a net benefit, I think, to the audiences.
This is an example of why competition is good, because creators like Mike Flanagan and Trevor Macy, because Amazon is competing in a space, they're able to go there for a better deal than what they're getting on Netflix.
Yeah, it gives them a position and some leverage, and gives them more power. So that's good.
Yeah, definitely.
This is also tied to the fact that Netflix has canceled the Midnight Club, which was after one season. That was the last thing that Mike Flanagan and Trevor Macy did for Netflix. And since those announcements came out like almost around the exact same time, I'm assuming those are directly connected. Netflix probably was like, yeah, we don't really need your show if you're not going to be focused here at Netflix anymore.
Right, yeah.
So if you're really interested, if you were a big fan of the Midnight Club, you can look up Mike Flanagan basically answering every unanswered question from the series. Since it was canceled, he basically said, I'll just let the cat out of the bag and give all the details about, what would have happened as the series progressed, what mysteries weren't solved yet and stuff. So that is all out there if you're interested in it. Our next news story, as James Gunn and Peter Safran's plans for DC are coming together, Wonder Woman 3, at least in its current iteration, has been bumped.
It looks like James Gunn and Peter Safran are finalizing a plan for what they want to do with DC, the DC universe going forward. They're expected to make their pitch to Warner Brothers management soon, and some information is coming out about that. Again, none of this is confirmed. This is coming from the Hollywood Reporter, so their sources are solid. They never post anything that they don't get from trusted sources.
We've mentioned this before, but there's three major industry news sources. It's Variety, the Hollywood Reporter, and Deadline. If you see something in one of those, it's almost assuredly 100% true.
But it does need to be stressed that nothing is confirmed, and the Hollywood Reporter in its reporting also stresses that this stuff is in flux and no decisions have been made, so things could change on a dime. But right now what they're hearing is that Wonder Woman 3 in its current planned iteration is dead, and several other high-profile DC projects are in jeopardy, including Black Adam 2, Man of Steel 2, and any continuation of Aquaman past, the next movie that's coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, DC was really messy. If they want to have something organized that's comparable to what the MCU does, what Kevin Feige oversees of the MCU, which is what they've been saying basically since Zaslav took over, is that he wants a Kevin Feige, and hiring James Gunn and Peter Safran was an attempt to do that. You have to kind of clean house because it's a huge mess there.
Yes,
and it's whether you like the stuff or not, whether you're a fan of the Snyderverse or not, the aspects of that, the standalone movies, the things that seem to contradict that, but maybe are part of it. It's just very messy and unconnected. And some of that needs to be adjusted and changed in order for something cohesive to come together.
Yes, exactly. And I am fully in agreement. I've been thinking for a long time that if they were going to get serious about making a cinematic universe to rival Marvel, that they needed to start fresh. They need to cast off the baggage of the current DCEU and the Snyderverse and start over fresh.
Yeah, exactly.
And it looks like that's what they're doing.
Our next news story is that as the Activision Blizzard Microsoft merger is coming together, Phil Spencer has committed a 10-year pledge for Call of Duty support on both Steam and Nintendo platforms. He's also addressed Sony, saying that if Sony wants to come to the table and talk about it, they'd be open to a similar 10-year pledge for Sony as well. This is interesting on multiple fronts. The two big ways to look at this that are interesting is one is that Activision Blizzard kind of half ignored Nintendo during the Wii U era and then just completely ignored them during the Switch era. I think to their detriment.
The last Call of Duty game on Nintendo platform was Ghosts on the Wii U.
Yeah. That was fairly early on the Wii U's life, I think, too.
Yes, it was, because PlayStation 4 and Xbox One launched in 2013, a year after the Wii U came out, and Ghosts was the first Call of Duty game on those platforms. It was a cross-gen game, and so it was a year into the Wii U's life. Mm-hmm. And then that was it for Call of Duty game. I believe Wii U got Black Ops 3 and Ghosts, and then that was it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, there hasn't really historically been great Nintendo support. It was actually kind of a little interesting during the Wii era because they kind of had a dedicated team that was porting the games and making them separately for that system. So in a sense, they were putting in even more effort than a port would be. They were basically making a fresh version for that system, which was kind of interesting.
One hilarious thing I saw was a New York Times reporting on this, which their reporter was what's surprising is Nintendo adding a violent shooter like Call of Duty to its family-friendly lineup.
Bayonetta 3.
It's
no more heroes,
And They specifically said adding a violent shooter like Call of Duty would be a departure for Nintendo. And I'm like, gestures to the Wii games and the Wii U games.
Yeah.
Like, a departure.
Or just like the fact that Nintendo just literally put out Bayonetta 3, which is like a kind of like a co-publishing deal they have with like Sega, I think. It's like I don't know the full details of that.
It's not like a co-publishing, like, it's like Nintendo's the full publisher.
Nintendo the publisher, but Sega owns the franchise.
Sega owns the IP, so it's kind of like, Nintendo is licensing the IP from Sega. Yeah.
But that's like something Nintendo is paying for as an exclusive, and that's more violent probably than almost anything in Call of Duty, I'd imagine. So it's like, it's just kind of interesting, and that's like coming from something published by Nintendo, and then like I said, No More Heroes 3, another example. There's violent stuff on Nintendo platforms.
So, the New York Times, their reporter thinks it's still like 1992.
Yeah. They're like, they can't even put blood in Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, exactly, So this is interesting because this announcement by Microsoft, by Phil Spencer specifically, comes on the eve that Microsoft is set to have an interview with the FTC about the deal. Sony has been very adamant that a 10-year deal for Call of Duty is not adequate for them, and they want Microsoft to commit to something more substantial. I think on Sony's end, not accepting the deal is a maneuver to try and get the acquisition squashed by regulators. That's what Sony wants to happen.
Yeah. So this feels very much like a political move on Microsoft's part in order to show that they're willing to play ball and that it's Sony that's holding stuff up, not them, and that they're not going to be a monopoly. They're not going to commit antitrust activities. And that's a very easy platitude to make. I mean, you make a 10-year commitment. What does that really mean? I know that's not necessarily them agreeing to putting out a game every year like on the others, like on Microsoft, you know?
Also, like, gave an interview to the Washington Post last night. At least that interview, he said very plainly and strictly, we have no plans to stop producing Call of Duty on Nintendo consoles after 10 years. That's just legalese. You don't need to worry about that.
Yeah. I think we always need to worry about that when it comes to big mergers and shit from huge companies, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's right now, it's in their best interest to not just state things like that, but to progress ahead with that in mind. But we don't know where they're going to be at in 10 years. They could be a very different strategy in mind by that point, you know?
Right, yeah, exactly. And I think Sony is right to be concerned about that, but, I also think, Sony's motivation is like, Sony feels better off with Activision remaining a third party, and so that's what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the two interesting fronts on that. There's the politics of the merger and the fears of a monopoly in the industry, which are well-founded and, but not necessarily a direct current threat, at least not right now. And then the other thing, as we mentioned, is just the fact that Nintendo's been very neglected by Call of Duty.
Yes, it has been.
So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. I was talking to some people on the Game Witness Discord, and I was saying, it doesn't mean anything. It's a 10-year deal. That could mean one game for all we know. Well, and that could be like a port of like the first Call of Duty with no improvements. Just like, and no multiplayer. Dropped on a random Nintendo system 8 years from now.
Yeah, it's a 10-year deal. Like, it implies that like Nintendo's going to get a Call of Duty game for the next 10 years. Like,
implies, but they're not on the hook for anything.
I'm sure like the terms of the deal were a lot more specific than just like 10 years. I'm sure like Nintendo didn't just sign one line that says Call of Duty for 10 years. I'm sure that was not the contract. Sure, the contract's like a lot more specific than, what's announced in like a news like headline or like a tweet.
Yeah. And we'll have to see what it is. Like, I think honestly, there's a really cheap and easy way that Microsoft can pursue this. And that is just, if you hit the point where you're like, I think we're a year away from Switch 2 anyways.
Even if Microsoft pulls it, even if Switch 2 is like 2 years off or something from this point, that sets Nintendo up with Call of Duty for like the entirety of like their next generation system.
Yeah, and the beginning of the next.
So Nintendo's gotta be pretty happy about that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that, like, they could literally just, like, port the games that, like, the late PS3 60 era games. the early PS4
Call of Duty
games
Ghost
and just kind of port those
Special
over.
Edition.
Yeah, there's
Call
a
of
really
Duty
easy
Ghost
way for them to handle this.
New Call of Duty Ghost Deluxe.
Yeah.
There you go. That's another Wii U to Switch port.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's an easy route for Microsoft Take here. We don't know what route they're going to take. I mean, they could just also put them all cloud streaming, you know?
Yeah, they could put them on cloud streaming.
Which would be like the least
Although
effort.
It'd be weird because like Microsoft has like xCloud tied to their Game Pass service. And so like, I don't know if they would be allowed to like use xCloud on the Switch. I have no idea what the details of that would be, or if like Microsoft would be willing to use like a third party cloud servicer for their own games. So I put the chances of a cloud version being very low just because of that.
I'm just pointing out the possibilities. Like, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get parity. You know,
well, it's not going to be parity because
I think you'll get parity on Steam. I don't think you're going to get parity.
It's not going to
be
parity on Switch because Switch can't run the new games coming out. Like Modern Warfare 2 is cross-gen, but it barely runs well at all on the base Xbox One, and the Switch is even weaker than that. So parity is not happening. At least on the Switch. Maybe when we get to Nintendo's next console.
I don't think they're gonna invest in a annual fucking impossible port.
Right.
Like they're not gonna be like contacting the people that brought Doom Eternal to Switch to do a yearly Call of Duty magic trick. So it's questionable like what this deal actually means. Are they going to set up a separate studio to handle, kind of like they did in the Wii era, where they just literally make a separate version of the game?
Probably will, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine taking like one of their main studios off of it just to make like a Switch version.
Or like I said, they never said anything about it being new Call of Duty, so they could literally just start porting. They could stay a couple years behind, and just port over old games. You know, I mean, we don't know, but
they'll be better than the nothing Switch is getting right now. Let's be honest.
Not for me. The only Microsoft game I care about them bringing over is the one they probably never will, which is Lost Odyssey.
Yeah, that's
Microsoft. If you want to bring a game over to Switch that I want to play, bring over Lost Odyssey. That's what I care about.
I think Mistwalker also has some say in that. So
I don't think they own it. I think Microsoft owns it.
No, they don't own it outright, but I believe they still have some say in like what happens with that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they make like a remastered version of that game and put it out on Steam and/or
that'd be nice.
Switch. That would be fun. Our last news story before we get to the trailers is Yuji Naka has been arrested on insider trading. Can you believe it?
Yuji Naka
arrested for insider trading
again. You should say again, part 2.
Yes, that's the part I left out initially. Is that he has been arrested again on insider charges. On our very last week's podcast, we reported that Yuji Naka had been arrested for insider trading charges. Now he's been arrested again on new insider trading charges, also related to Square Enix, this time in relation to the mobile game Final Fantasy VII: The First Soldier, which he had foreknowledge of and used to invest. So, again, Yuji Naka just can't stay away from that sweet insider trading money.
That sweet, sweet insider trading money.
I mean, in all likelihood, all this stuff probably happened. These things are just things he's being caught on individually that he already did before the first charges were brought, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely.
But it's just like, oh god.
It's just like a revelation, like, yeah, he's been doing it, you know, like, he's been all in.
Every time Square Enix announces anything, we should like look at and see if Yuji Naka bought stock in whatever company is related to that besides Square Enix. It's like, oh, they announced an HD 2D port of Chrono Trigger. It's being handled by, I don't know, Level 5. So, did Level 5 get some investment from Yuji Naka?
Right, yeah, exactly. Let's comb all Yuji Naka's investments. There's exciting game announcements hidden in those.
That's it for our regular news stories, and now we're going to talk about some trailers that have come out in the past week. I actually wanted to keep this segment kind of small, but just so many fucking trailers came out this last week. We're going to start things off with The Three Musketeers, which is one of the first, like, kind of Hollywood films, I think, that they're just kind of going full French language on.
Yeah, which is that's interesting. It looks like they're going for, like, a very faithful adaptation of it. It's this big historical epic that kind of like you don't see much from Hollywood anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't get this too much, which is interesting. But yeah, apparently they're doing it in 2 parts because that's Hollywood now. If we could take a novel and split it into 2 movies, we're going to do that.
I like to think that this is a prequel to Django Unchained.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
But yeah, so that's Three Musketeers. Had a pretty fun trailer.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
We also got a trailer for The Pale Blue Eye. I didn't get to watch this trailer. I was going to do it right before the show, and we didn't have the chance. So this is your chance to guide us through the Pale Blue Eye trailer.
Yeah, this is great. This has got Christian Bale as the lead. He's an investigator investigating a murder, obviously. And really, it's about him, and it's about Edgar Allan Poe, and it looks fantastic. Christian Bale is great in this trailer. Everything looks good. I'm actually excited to watch this. This is not a series. It's a film by Netflix. Mm-hmm. It's rated R by the MPAA. It comes out in January. Today's batch of trailers, this was the best one, in my opinion.
All right.
So, yeah.
Next up, we got a trailer for Treason, which is I believe, a limited series for Netflix that stars everybody's boy, Charlie Cox.
Charlie Cox.
A little bit of a political espionage kind of story going on. Takes place in the United Kingdom. Looks fun.
Charlie Cox is the head of MI6, who may or may not be a double agent working against the British government. We don't know. It's kind of mysterious. It looks like a edge-of-your-seat thriller.
Yeah, that's coming. Then we got our first look trailer for Gen V. This is the spin-off to The Boys that is going to focus on a school, a college for people learning to be superheroes, I guess, but within The Boys universe. And this trailer, the one kind of real detail it gave us, besides a bunch of explicit gore scenes, is that there's going to be characters from The Boys in Gen V. Not just like directly in it, but also we saw like A-Train's like soda deal and that kind of like his energy drink deal or whatever.
It takes
like
place in that universe, like obviously, like they heavily market the shit out of the 7. So yeah, of course you're gonna see like that stuff in there.
Yeah,
whether the actor for A-Train like actually shows up, because they showed
Ashley.
They showed some characters from Boys that they were like the more minor side characters, like Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
Homelander doesn't show up in this trailer. I mean, I already assumed beforehand that was going to do it.
So it's interesting because I'm going to bring this up as a short diversion before we move on, but there's a show called The Rookie on ABC that's got Nathan Fillion. It's about, he's like an LAPD officer. And they made a spin-off series called The Rookie Feds. It's about federal agents. It stars, God, I can't remember her name, from like Scream Queens and stuff. The one, like the black police officer from Scream Queens and was in Claws.
Niecy Nash.
That's it. And she's in that show, and that's about the FBI. But like just about every episode of that spin-off series features like some character from the original series. Like there's always like they run into, a patrol officer and it's one of the characters from that, the first show. Or they end up like having like a lawyer that they're dealing with and he's on the other show, So it's like they've really kind of more deeply integrated the spin-off. Like they've kind of made a more integrated world. And I think that's kind of the era that we're in now. We're like away from the times where like, you would occasionally have a crossover event, or you would occasionally have a character show up on one show and then another. And now we're kind of in an era where things are just always happening together in like one universe, and it kind of makes it feel more cohesive, So I think that's probably more of what we're going to see. We're probably going to see a lot of characters crossing over, not necessarily major characters though, but enough to make it just really feel like the two worlds are deeply connected.
Yeah, exactly.
So it looked good. You brought up when you said it, you just really don't learn anything because it's just like mostly just a bunch of explicit gore shots. And
yeah, it's a very incoherent trailer. All the stuff about it being like a school and stuff, that's mostly gleaned from synopsis that was about
that kind of looks like a dorm room.
yeah. Not so much from this trailer. Like this trailer doesn't like really tell you much.
Yeah.
Like
I said, there's just some moments every so often you're like, I think that's a dorm room.
It's just like a series of like what the fuck moments.
Yeah.
And so to me it's not a very good trailer. It doesn't get me like interested or excited in this. It's kind of like over relying on you being already familiar with The Boys and they'll be like, yeah, this is the boys. Don't worry.
Yeah. To be fair, this is very similar to like the last, for instance, the first trailer for season 3 of The Boys was very much like this. The difference, of course, being that you already kind of know where that story is. And here you don't, but it's very similar in the sense, if you go back and watch like the first trailer for season 3 of The Boys, it was basically the same thing. Just a bunch of explicit gore shots. And if you like, oh, that's an interesting detail or something, but nothing like coherent, nothing that you could put together like what's happening. But if you've watched The Boys, you already know these characters. You already know their general trajectory. So you didn't really need that. Whereas with this trailer, it's like, okay, this is an entirely new lead cast. And I really don't know who anybody is, what any of their motivations are, anything about them, except that there's some gory stuff. It looked like one person could use some like attacks based on their blood, or I don't know, could kind of vaguely glean something like that. So it doesn't work as well as it did for that season 3 trailer just because we don't know anything about this show,
Right, yeah, exactly. It doesn't work like, again, it's a teaser, like, they definitely do need a more expanded trailer that fleshes out, like, the concept of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but, I mean, we'll see. Obviously not casting judgment on the show based on this one thing. I just don't think it was, like, a good first introduction.
We also got a trailer for The Last of Us. This is, I think, the second trailer we've gotten. And then before that before the first trailer, I think we also had some footage, like, in a general HBO, like, highlight reel kind of thing. So this is, like, the third time we've seen something from The Last of Us in the second trailer. And the first, like, major trailer where it really kind of hits some story beats, gives you an idea of kind of what the characters are like. Have you played the games, like, at all? I know, like, we were talking before, and I finished them, or?
Yeah, no, I played some of the first one, but I never finished it.
As I was telling you before the podcast, like, I have no interest in playing this game. I'm just not interested at all from the perspective of a game. But as a series, I think it looks interesting. I'm excited about it.
It does look good as a series. Like, I have to admit, like, I'm not a Sony fanboy. I'm apprehensive on, like, most TV shows based on, like, video games and stuff. Like, this looks legit like this could stand on its own and not just be, like, typical video game adaptation.
Mm-hmm. And it looks fun. I like that they gave the characters personality, because before I just kind of knew the general concept, and it's like, oh, you see all the imagery. Oh, you see the characters giving serious looks. Here you get to see, like, is it Ellie, the female character? You get to see her kind of Ellie, like joking a little bit,
Yeah.
You get to see there's a little bit of dry humor from,
and of course,
Pedro Pascal's character.
That actress is great. She was in Game of Thrones, and, like,
yeah,
she stole the show with, like, her scenes. Even her minor role in that show made an impression.
Yeah. So I mean, everything from it looks good. So it's one of those things, like, I have no interest in playing the game. I'm excited for the show.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how that goes, but it looks really good. And it's HBO, which is already like that's already like a point in its favor. HBO usually doesn't miss that much. Next, we got a trailer for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which has thankfully mostly washed my mouth out of the bitter, horrifying taste of Crystal Skull, the last Indiana Jones movie. This one looks a lot better than that. Yeah, I've never been like a huge Indiana Jones fan, but I think this looks like a really fun movie. It's got some cool callbacks too, because like there's a famous scene, I think in Raiders, where like a guy pulls out these swords and he's throwing them around, and then Indiana pulls out a gun and shoots him. And here at the end of the trailer, at the end of the trailer, you have Indy like wielding off a big group with his whip, and then they all pull out guns. And he talks, it's like a callback to that scene. So it's kind of cool that they're kind of really touching on the past movies here when they're putting this one together. So I think it looks good. It has probably the best de-aging I've ever seen. With there's a shot of Indiana Jones has a hood taken off his head, and it's probably the best de-aging effect I've seen.
Oh yeah, the de-aging of it almost looks like they filmed the scene like back in the 80s.
Yeah,
crazy.
Did Harrison Ford have an identical son that we didn't know existed until now?
Right. Yeah. It would look like they filmed it in the 80s if it wasn't filmed on, like, digital film.
Yeah, definitely. It has that level of clarity that is not from the 80s. But yeah, that's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Looks cool. I'm not a huge Indiana Jones fan. This won't be like a day one for me. I'll probably catch it in theaters, so at some point.
Hey, it's probably like a Disney Plus for me. I'm not rushing to watch this or anything.
Are you Ukrainian to watch this? Last trailer we have up is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which, man,
looks so
I have
good.
not seen the trailer for The Pale Blue Eye, so I cannot contradict your point of that being the best trailer. For me, the best trailer in the bunch of the ones I've seen is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Oh, I don't blame you. It's a fantastic
I love the use
trailer.
of the song. I was like almost crying watching the trailer.
Well, yeah, it's very emotional. It looks like, James Gunn said as much in interviews, but this movie is mostly about Rocket and Rocket's origins. It looks like it's going to be a very emotional journey for him. It's also a goodbye to the Guardians in general, because James Gunn said this is the last Guardians movie, at least, with this iteration of the team. Like, Marvel Studios is obviously open to do whatever the hell they want in the future.
Basically, he said this will be the last Guardians with him, but Marvel can do what they want. And then Batista said that he's done with it after this, too.
Yeah. But James Gunn specifically, in one of the newer interviews, said this is the last Guardians with this version of the team.
Yeah.
So this iteration of the Guardians is done after this movie.
Yeah.
If Marvel makes a fourth movie, it's not going to be the same lineup.
It'd be interesting to see if any of the actors carry through to some other projects within the MCU in some capacity, but we don't even know. I mean, it looks like one or some of the cast might die, the characters in this movie. There's some scenes that seem to be showing some pretty hard reactions that look like something might have happened.
I don't know if anything means anything that drastic, especially since they played that card at the end of the last movie, so.
But we don't know what's going on with that, if there's going to be any kind of major thing like that. The one cast thing we have for sure know is that Batista said that he is not returning, so we know Drax in that incarnation will not show up again in the MCU.
Batista, man, I love him. He's a great guy. He's a great Drax. But yeah, he had some words about his disappointments with the character. He said one of his big disappointments playing Drax was that his storyline, his beef against Thanos, was never satisfactorily explored.
Yeah.
According to him, because, they did Infinity War and stuff, and Drax was, sidelined for that.
It's a really hard thing to do, because you have so many characters, connected to that.
Yeah. Batista expressed that he wished he got to explore that aspect of the character more, and did not get to do that. Batista said, he's been very loyal to James Gunn. When the whole controversy over James Gunn's tweets happened and James Gunn was initially fired off of Guardians 3, Batista said he wasn't going to return for Guardians 3 if James Gunn wasn't directing.
Yeah. He's very loyal. A lot of the people on James Gunn Productions are very loyal to James Gunn.
Oh, yeah.
He's also known for having a no asshole policy on his set.
Yes.
Which kind of shows you that's why you end up probably seeing a lot of the same actors popping up again and again in his projects, because people love working with him and they love the community that he fosters.
Yes.
And so with that is going to come a lot of loyalty as well.
But yeah, I'm super excited for this movie. It's one of the Marvel movies I'm the most excited for.
I'd say it is the Marvel movie I'm the most excited for that's coming up, I mean, until we see maybe a trailer for Fantastic Four or something,
Right, yeah, exactly.
But we haven't seen anything from that, so it's hard to be excited yet.
Yeah, it's hard to be excited for a movie you haven't seen anything. That with the state of Marvel movies recently, it could go either way. Being super exciting or being a dud.
With the state of past Fantastic Four adaptations as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 looks phenomenal. Super excited for it. We talked about the holiday special last week. That was great. Good setup for this, and I'm really looking forward to it. That's it for our news segment, and now we're going to move on to On the Horizon. On the Horizon. On the Horizon is where we talk about stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks. Now we're going to be covering stuff coming up all the way until January 6th, because that's, we're going to be gone till then. So we have to cover the stuff that's coming out before then. But there isn't too much because it's the holiday season, so there's not a lot of new stuff coming out. But there is some stuff. And we're starting out with Kindred, which is a mini-series. It's a time travel mini-series coming to Hulu on Tuesday, December 13th. It has to do with plantation and slavery, and there's there's like a time travel element to it. It's based on a book that's pretty well known and beloved. That's going to be coming to Hulu on Tuesday, December 13th. National Treasure: Edge of History, the Disney Plus spinoff of National Treasure, is coming on Wednesday, December 14th to Disney Plus. Avatar: The Way of Water is coming to theaters on Friday, December 16th. Jack Ryan is returning on Amazon Prime for its third season on Tuesday, December 21st. Glass Onion, which had a limited theatrical release, is going to be hitting Netflix for its main distribution on Friday, December 23rd. This is the sequel to Knives Out, Rian Johnson's detective stuff based heavily on like kind of like the Agatha Christie style detective story.
Right, yeah.
So if you like that, check that out. The Witcher Blood Origin miniseries is coming on Friday, December 25th, Christmas Day, on Netflix. They cloned Tyrone. Do you remember? We watched this trailer like a month ago at least.
Jeez, I completely forgot about that. That's animated, right?
No. That's the one with like Jamie Foxx, and it's got like a very like kind of almost blaxploitation kind of vibe to it.
Oh, that, yeah, okay, yeah.
That's coming to Netflix on Friday, December 30th. Star Wars: The Bad Batch is returning for its second season on Disney Plus on Wednesday, January 4th. And lastly, you talked about this trailer, The Pale Blue Eye. The movie is coming to Netflix on Friday, January 6th. So that's definitely something for you. You're excited for that one.
Yeah, it looks good. I can't deny that. It looks great. So yeah.
That brings us to our final segment, Advocates of Great Entertainment.
Advocates of Great Entertainment. I'm here to kill chaos, bitches!
So for this edition of Advocates of Great Entertainment, we are going back to the Christmas movie well. We each picked a Christmas movie to represent. We're going to start with my pick.
I should say they're not strictly Christmas movies. They're movies that we decide to do a twist. Not intentionally, by the way, but like I like how it turned out because it's a twist on that. Like where last week we very intentionally chose Christmas themed films. This year it's films that are set during Christmas.
Yeah.
So they're not
unintentionally that ended up happening. Yeah.
The films we're talking about today, they're not about Christmas. That just happens to be like when they're set.
Yeah. Well, those are my favorite Christmas movies.
Yes.
My favorite ones are the ones where Christmas is the backdrop and then affects the tone as it moves forward, you know?
I like that because I think it makes this year like unique from last year so that we're not just repeating ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So my pick this year was Edward Scissorhands, which is available on Disney Plus, directed by Tim Burton, written by Tim Burton and Caroline Thompson, who is a frequent Burton collaborator, worked on The Nightmare Before Christmas and other stuff. And yeah, this is one of Tim Burton's absolute classics. Came out in, I believe, 1990. So it was like right at the beginning of the 90s. Started filming in the 80s, obviously. An interesting aspect about this is that this is very much considered to be kind of quasi-autobiographical of Tim Burton in the sense of like him feeling like an outsider, basically.
Yeah, I picked up on that. Yeah, it's very much a fable about the outsider and, you know, like the lonely, quiet, sensitive, misunderstood outsider, extremely talented. I was like, yeah, Tim's talking about himself. Like, it's obvious.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, a lot of Tim Burton movies kind of have that expressing that aspect of his own life, you know, but Edward Scissorhands, like, I think more than any of them fits into that mold. It's funny to watch for me because my mom went to the same high school as Tim Burton.
Oh, really?
Like, not at the same time, but like at the same high school.
He was like, best friends with Tim Burton.
No, they were like, you know, I don't know, 6 years apart, something like that. So they weren't ever in school together. But he went to high school and he grew up in a town in California called Burbank. So Burbank is a town that I'm really well versed in. There's a lot of, you know, food places that we go to there that we'll still drive out to. There's a lot of stuff because of my mom growing up there and family that we had in that area that is just a very common thing for me. This is very heavily based on him growing up in Burbank. And you can tell if you've ever been to Burbank and you see it, you can see a lot of it. But it's funny because they actually filmed it in Florida because Tim Burton said when they started filming it that Burbank had changed too much. It wasn't enough like it was when he was growing up to really capture the vision he had. But he talked about like how, you know, he did things like when they modified the homes of where they filmed in Florida, like they made the windows smaller to make the people feel more paranoid and stuff like that. That's very much tonally within this movie. That's where I want to use as an entry point, is that this is a heavy critique of kind of like suburban lifestyle.
Yeah, it is. Like, what struck me is like, this is a weird movie. This is all like very heightened reality. Like,
oh, it's a fairy tale.
Yeah, it's a fairy tale. Like, this suburban, like, it's a parody of suburbia. It's not like an accurate representation. Like, all the houses are pastel colored. You know, like, obviously, like, if you go to a real suburb, everything's not going to be like garish pastel colors.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah. But this one
it's not even just that. It's like the cars, the outfits they wear. They're all like kind of color coded into the same like 4 pastel color patterns.
Yeah,
like,
yes. It's overused. And the residents of this neighborhood are all these over-the-top, zany characters.
Yeah, kind of like the worst tropes of like suburban like housewives and stuff.
Yeah, it's mostly housewives.
This is like pre-Karen Karens.
yeah, exactly. It's mostly the housewives too that I focus on. Interestingly enough, you don't see the men too often. The father of the family that Edward Scissorhands gets adopted, you see him a decent amount, but the other husbands in the neighborhood you only occasionally see. Like, the focus is way more on the housewives.
It's actually kind of reminds me a little bit of like when you watch like say Stranger Things and you see like Mike's dad and just kind of he's just there but he's not really involved, you know. That's like what a lot of the fathers or the husbands are like in Edward Scissorhands. They're just kind of there.
Yes.
You know, they'll be at the barbecue and that's kind of it.
Right, yeah. There's one scene where you see them all get into their cars for work and the cars pull out and they go down like a big line, like a parade.
Yeah, because it's all like at the same time. They're all working the same like 9-to-5 jobs and it's all like that very
probably at the same place.
Yeah, it's that very structured like suburbia kind of lifestyle.
Yes, exactly. And then you contrast that with like this big gothic mansion that's on a hill towering over the entire neighborhood. You know,
so
like
great
it looks
they
like
did
it came like from a different dimension.
It's so great the way they did that. Cause kind of like what I think is maybe like the main character for the first half of the movie at least is Peg, who's this woman. She's like an Avon Cosmetics sales lady. And she's going door to door to her own neighbors and none of them are excited to see her. They're all just kind of annoyed at her going door to door and stuff, but she's trying to do her job and stuff. And she's kind of not really hitting anything. And she stops and she's like thinking like, oh, where am I going to go? And then she looks in her rearview mirror and you just see it's all the suburbia. And then he looks in the mirror and there's this giant gothic castle in the background that just has no business being there.
Yeah, it just has no business being there. Also, like, this movie runs on its own weird internal logic, because there's nothing about that place that screams potential Avon customer, but she goes there anyway.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like I said, this is a fairy tale. So if you're going in expecting like real logical reasoning, you're not going to get it. It's
people don't like exactly behave logically in this movie.
I mean, they basically say that like snow was created by him making ice sculptures.
Yes.
Which I think is kind of a California joke too, because Burbank's in Southern California. I live in Southern California.
Yeah,
it never snows here.
Yeah, there's not really snow. Yeah, it's like, the only time it snows is when Edward is doing the ice sculptures, which where he gets the ice, who knows? It's like, okay.
You didn't see the giant refrigeration plant in the back of the castle?
Right, yeah. One nice touch is they got Vincent Price to play the inventor who created Edward.
He was probably the first...
like, last roles of his career, you know?
He was probably the first, like, celebrity death, like, that I remember as a child.
Yeah.
You know, like, when you're a kid, you don't pick up on every celebrity that dies. You just kind of, like, you don't understand it. But he was one of the first ones where I was like, oh, that's that guy. He was in Edward Scissorhands, and I had this videotape from, like, it was from, like, the Hallmark store or something. That was, like, him presenting all these old movies. And so, like, I knew him from that, too. So he was one of the first, like, celebrity
in, like, the Thriller video, which, like, scared the crap out of me when I was, like, 5 years old.
So I was, like, weirdly a big Vincent Price fan, like, right before he died. Just those weird conjoined elements.
Yeah, Vincent Price's final role was Edward Scissorhands. He did the TV movie Heart of Justice, was his last screen appearance. But yeah.
I was a big fan of his right before he passed, and he was probably the first celebrity death that I remember growing up as a kid, you know. But, yeah, it was a great touch, a great role for him to be in, too. I love him in that role. He was actually, Tim Burton did, like, a short film when he was at Cal Arts called Vincent, I believe, that was, like, basically inspired by Vincent Price as well. So, like, Vincent Price was, like, a big influence on Tim Burton.
And Tim Burton. Yeah, surprisingly, the artsy goth kid loves old school horror stuff.
Yeah.
What a shock.
But yeah, so it's just kind of, I like that tonal disparity of this kind of like pastel suburb and the gothic setting of the castle. And kind of like, I like the kind of unrealistic way in which, you know, the people accept or don't accept him within the community. You know, like he's kind of accepted as long as he's interesting.
Yeah, he's accepted as long as he's entertaining. But then as soon as he comes off as threatening or menacing, mostly due to Anthony Michael Hall's character.
What a dick.
Yeah. You know, then they start turning on him. It's interesting. I want to say I'm mixed on this movie because the actors do such a great job, especially Johnny Depp as Edward Scissorhand.
Yeah.
He does a fantastic job with that. You know, it's visually striking. It's one of the most visually striking movies I've ever seen. The contrast, again, between like this really whacked out suburban neighborhood and then like everything is so over the top. It's crazy. Narratively, for me, it falls flat. It's got like a really simple story, but like it also like kind of feels like it goes nowhere because it ends almost like where it started, with Edward living by himself in that mansion, and the rest of the community goes back to just doing what they were doing because they believe he's dead. Nobody learns a lesson, really.
Well, I think in a way the movie it's the lesson of the movie is that integration sometimes doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's about like how things just don't connect with each other. And I mean, like Peg even says as much, like towards the end of the movie, there's a point where she says, I should have never brought him down here. Not as like it's saying that because he's not good enough to be there, but because like he doesn't fit, you know?
Right, yeah, he doesn't fit in.
She should have realized that when she brought him down and stuff. And I think that's a big part of the movie, is that it's just these parts of these two worlds that weren't meant to connect. And they kind of cohabitated in this really weird way where like it was always in the background, but nobody acknowledged it. That this castle was there. It was like just like a blind spot that everybody had for some reason. So I think that's kind of what it's trying to illustrate. And that goes along with like what we said, the kind of autobiographical element for Tim Burton, you know, for his life. This is like for me, it's a classic movie, but I think it's also very, very of its time.
Yeah.
Like there's things that just don't hold up that well unless like you watch it through the lens of being
also, it's
in that
weird
time.
that like, one of the main characters and the main love interest for Edward Scissorhands isn't introduced until like almost halfway through the film.
Yeah, it's a little strange. It's a great introduction though.
Yeah, it is. Oh yeah, it is.
So with the waterbed.
I saw the waterbed. I was like, oh man, waterbeds. Remember those things? I don't. It's funny because like I don't think like I really knew anybody who actually had a waterbed.
I think my sister had one. Either my sister had one or my mom and dad had one at one point in my childhood. I remember we had one. It wasn't mine.
Right.
Somebody in my family had one, you know, and it was weird. It's a very like timely thing that nobody does that anymore. Nobody gets those anymore, but
right,
very funny.
Yeah, those fell out of fashion.
Mm-hmm. It's also funny when you're watching like, you know, there's the dinner scene with Anthony Michael Hall's character is there, and he's talking about like, you know, the things that his dad has, and he's all big screen TV, forehead VCR. Like,
yeah.
It's
like, no, 90s was probably like a rear projection TV.
Oh,
like,
probably not even that. It was probably like a 40-inch like tube TV that weighed like 10,000 pounds.
Yeah.
With a just absolute shit picture quality, you know? But it's just funny, like, yeah, like there are a lot of like those kind of timely elements in it that kind of are funny watching now. But yeah, I mean, to me, like, it's still an absolute classic though, and I gotta say, I think it's probably Danny Elfman's best score too.
It's a great score. I think for me, the movie succeeds on its style, the acting, the performances, and the music. It doesn't so much succeed narratively. That's where the mixed feelings come from. But yeah, like, it's fine. I had a good time with it.
Yeah. There's certain characters, like I said, they just make them so hateable. Like, Anthony Michael Hall's Jim is Joyce, who's kind of like the cougar.
Yeah. Yeah. She's like the prototypical. Yeah. A lot of these characters are like purposefully like stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Again, let's take what you will. Because, yeah, you're only supposed to relate to, like, the main characters.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to be relating to, like, any of these other people.
Yeah, there's kind of like one family that you're kind of supposed to relate to the characters within. And then Edward Scissorhands, and I think the only other relatable character is maybe the police officer.
Yeah.
He's kind of used as, like, an outside perspective, like...
Also, like, another thing is, like, we talked about like, the neighborhood being all bright and colorful and the mansion being like all dark and goth. But like the scene where he goes to the bank, it's so like clinical, comically clinical. Again, like it's great.
There's a lot of little attentions to that. There's a part where I remember somebody pointed this out and I'd seen it before and I thought it was really cool. There's a part where Joyce, who's I mentioned is kind of like the cougar character, when towards the beginning of the movie, when Peg visits her and she's trying to like hook up with like a repairman at her house.
Yes, yeah.
And she's impatient and she's tapping on the wood panel on the door. She's waiting for Peg to like leave, like trying to convince her to get out of there and stuff. And it's a little like idiosyncratic like traits of characters like that are done really well. And there's little parts like there's a guy who at one point he talks to Edward about like how he was in the war and how he has no feeling in his leg anymore. And he tells him, don't ever let anybody call you like a cripple. And then later on in the movie, you see him and he's talking to the one kid as he's walking home and he's like, did they find him yet? And he's like, who? And he's like, the cripple.
Oh, yeah.
It's like those little kind of like things, those callbacks to kind of like show that the hypocrisies of it's usually used in a scathing way towards the characters, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I like all of that. Like, I like the fact that basically the villain of the movie is suburbia.
Yes.
But that is Edward Scissorhands. That was my pick. I'm glad you were able to enjoy it a bit. And I think it was a big missing gap in your film-going history.
It was, yeah. I'm glad I watched it.
Now let's talk about your movie. Give us the details.
Oh, man. My movie is probably a movie that needs no introduction. It's one of my all-time favorites from the 80s. I consider this movie a classic in its own right. And the movie I'm talking about is Gremlins, which is a fantastic...
Oh, shit, I watched Critters. Just kidding.
You watched the bad one.
Damn, I watched the wrong one.
I don't know, Critters is a fun movie too, but like, it's not a classic like Gremlins is.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. By the way, just so everybody knows.
Yeah. This is wonderful. It's a homage to like 1950s monster movies, is what it is. It's directed by Joe Dante.
Who has a surprising history in the 80s.
Yeah.
He directed the original Piranha movie, The Howling. Explorers was like a big favorite of mine as a kid. When I was like a little kid, I remember that movie. That's the one where the kids build like a spaceship out of garbage. Then he did The Burbs, and he also directed a bunch of episodes of Erie, Indiana, which was like a favorite old TV show of mine, like a kid's kind of horror show. Kind of in the vein of like what was that campfire one that was on Nickelodeon?
Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah, like Erie, Indiana was kind of like in the same vein as that. So he's like an interesting figure. He like kind of epitomizes the 80s. Like if you watch like 80s movies and stuff and you like were to analyze what is in an 80s movie, Joe Dante is like kind of the epitome of that. like his stuff.
Yes.
But it was written by Chris Columbus, who's better known as a director. He directed, the first two Harry Potter movies. And
he directed, the first two Home Alones.
Mrs. Doubtfire, Bicentennial Man. So he's mostly known for that. He also, but one of the first things he wrote was like The Goonies.
That's probably why this has like a more family-friendly slant than like pure horror.
Yeah.
But it's fine because like I think it nails it. This is more of like a horror comedy than straight horror because the Gremlins themselves are such zany characters. They're like cartoon characters.
They're not even necessarily evil so much as they are just like really mischievous. And
they're mischievous, but
to the point of being deadly,
well, they're mischievous, but they're also vicious. There are scenes where they are definitely intentionally attempting to inflict lethal harm.
Yeah. But they're not like, that's not like their purpose so much as like their purpose is just to amuse themselves. Almost,
Right.
It's funny because I was telling you that Gremlins are like a relatively recent addition to like modern or to like folklore. They don't go like way far back like leprechauns or fairies or things like that, you know, sprites, things like that. Gremlins are they were basically created to explain the issues that were happening in the early like aeronautics, like airplanes and stuff, like when an airplane would crash and go down or something. It was like, oh, there was a gremlin getting into the gears.
There's a character in this film who's like a World War II vet who is like going on about gremlins like at the beginning of the film.
I think he even sees one of the cars. It's like a gremlin type of car, you know?
Yeah. Like his thing is like he's like all the foreign manufactured stuff has gremlins in it.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny because then he's attacked by real gremlins.
Yeah, on his American-made tractor.
On his American-made tractor, yeah. Which is like the great irony of it.
Mm-hmm. It's just a really weird thing. Like, I hadn't thought about that. You think of, like, Gremlins besides the movie as, like, a folklore entity being something that goes way back, but it's only, like, 20th century.
Yes.
So that's just kind of like an interesting thing that influences this. And it goes with that because that's what they were in the folklore, is they weren't, like, goblins that were, like, just out to kill and rape and pillage and destroy. They were just amusing themselves.
Yes.
They're just, like, horrible brats that are, they're like middle school students. They're like middle school students with no fear of getting in trouble for doing something bad.
This kind of like, this movie, they expand on that with their own lore and mythology, like, invented for this film. I don't think, like, the concept of Mogwai exists outside of this film.
It is a Cantonese word, though. It means devil in Cantonese.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So in this movie, gremlins start out as cute little Mogwai creatures that spawn more Mogwai if they get wet, and then they cocoon and turn into gremlins if they manage to like eat after midnight.
Mm-hmm. And they're sensitive to bright light.
And they die in the sunlight.
Mm-hmm. This also goes into like kind of the theme of the movie might just be like follow the rules.
Yes, follow the rules. Basically, the main character is Billy Peltzer, played by Zach Galligan, who ends up receiving a Mogwai named Gizmo for Christmas from his father, a failed inventor, Randall Peltzer, who means well, but his inventions are always like these goofy things that always end up failing.
It's a very 80s thing. You had elements of that like in the Goonies too.
Yes.
Like, with the one character and his father are both into like wacky adventures.
It's really funny because like they also continue that theme of like this guy like having bad ideas for inventions. Like after the scene, Gizmo gets wet and spawns more Mogwais, and he finds out, he's like, wait, no, we could sell these. This could be like the Peltzer pet. And I'm like, that's just as malfunctioning as like anything else you came up with.
It's funny, like a third of the movie's runtime is probably just him explaining one of his inventions.
Yes, yeah.
That has like nothing to do with the plot at all, but it's just there. That's one thing I picked up on that I thought was kind of funny in this movie, is that there's like all these extraneous plot points that are set up that aren't really necessary and they don't go anywhere, but they're kind of tone building more than anything.
Yes. Yeah,
and the father being an inventor is one of them. It's like it's completely unnecessary to the plot, but it's like a little detail.
It's not like one of his inventions like saves the day or anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely unnecessary, but there's constant references to it. Like there's always like they're trying to make a cup of coffee and it doesn't work right because it's his coffee making invention.
Yeah, their house is like full of his stupid inventions and they don't work right. There's a scene where Billy is trying to just make a glass of orange juice, and it gets like orange like pulp and everything all over the kitchen, to the point where Corey Feldman's character is just like, what happened here? Yeah, Pete.
That's another one. Corey Feldman's character. He comes in like he's going to be this important character at some point, and he has a few scenes, and then it's just completely forgotten, basically.
He disappears. His last scene is he's like trying to ask the teacher a question, and the teacher's just trying to get him out of there.
Yeah, and that's like right before that teacher like dies.
Yeah, right before the teacher dies. And like, you don't see Pete after that scene.
Yeah, it's so weird.
He's just like out of the movie.
Yeah, he's just kind of, there's also a moment where Billy has, one of his bosses is played by Judge Reinhold.
Yes. And that's right. Yeah, he's an asshole. Yeah, you're right.
You find out he's young, and that he actually kind of grew up with Billy. And that they were actually kind of like friends or something.
Or they
before.
were.
And they have this whole scene in a bar where he's basically talking about, you know, how successful he's going to be, and, you know, everything's about like money and success for him.
And he's talking down to Billy and Kate, who's there, and
then that's the last time we see him.
Yeah, you think like, yeah, this guy is going to get his comeuppance pretty hard, and no, he disappears from the film entirely after that scene.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
The one character I'm glad they really gave a comeuppance scene to, though, is Mrs. Ruby Deagle, who's introduced as like this cartoonishly evil woman. It's like a Cruella de Vil.
She's basically like Scrooge, because like she hates Christmas, she hates carolers, she seems to hate everything except her cats.
Yeah. That's what I was saying when I watched it. I was watching it with my mom, and I'm like, oh great, another evil cat lady. She is
Scrooge, because they show like this poor woman who's like financially in dire straits for the holidays, and she has like these 2 young kids, and she's begging Miss Deagle to like give her a loan. Miss Deagle is telling her no. This character is literally like modeled after Scrooge. It's funny.
He demands that Billy give her his dog so she can have it put down.
Yeah.
And she threatens that if he doesn't give it to her so she takes it to a shelter and has it put down, that she'll murder it slowly herself.
Yes, she makes like all these horrible threats. And so the scene where the gremlins kill her is so great. It's one of the most cathartic scenes of the entire film, because she was so horrible. Yeah, you don't care that the gremlins killed her in like this horrific manner. Which was also comically funny.
I have to say that I've seen this movie before, but it's been like, God, it's probably been since maybe the early 90s that I've seen this movie, so it's been so long. When I think about Gremlins, most of what I think about is stuff from Gremlins 2, just because it was a more recent movie.
Yes,
so this came out in stuck in my memory.
4, and Gremlins 2, I believe, came out in 91. I want to say either 90 or 91.
Yeah, so that sticks in my memory a little bit better just because of how old I was when I watched it. But there's
Gremlins 2 isn't set during Christmas, so it didn't fit the theme of this Advocates.
Yeah, there's only a few scenes in Gremlins that really are in my memory. One is with that woman when she's in that scene, the stair scene where she gets launched up. Like, that was distinct in my memory. Another thing that's distinct in my memory from this movie, in a very negative way, it was like traumatizing for me, is when they put the gremlin in the microwave and it explodes. Because that was my first time understanding that like a microwave would do that to a living thing. After you've seen that, then you start to hear the stories of like, oh, some guy got arrested because he put a cat in a microwave or something. And like that, I remember that like traumatizing me as a kid, like knowing those details. And that kind of all started for me with that scene where she puts the gremlin in the microwave, even though it's a monster, you know?
That scene never bothered me. I don't know.
It just had that weird effect on me. It introduced me to the concept of a living creature being microwaved, you know?
Yeah, even though it was like this horrible creature.
Yeah, still, it still just meant that I now understood that as a concept. So, just like that, it's kind of weird that those are like the things that when I think back on it, I remember that. And another one would be maybe like all the gremlins packed in the theater watching Snow White.
Yes. That's a classic moment. Another thing like I remember that stuck with me this whole time was Gizmo driving the Barbie car.
Yeah. That's another like iconic scene that is cemented in my memory as well. Yeah.
And Kate's horrific story about like what happened to her dad on Christmas, why she hates Christmas.
I forgot that, and then when I was watching again, I was cracking up because one of my favorite, I love like parody Christmas songs, and probably my favorite parody Christmas song is the one where it's the little girl singing about Santa Claus being stuck up in her chimney, and she doesn't understand the concept that he's dead, and so like she's talking about that like each verse is like longer, so it's like first it's like he's been there all night long, then he's been there all week long, then month long, then year long. And it's always like, oh, the house smells funny, you know, like something's gone wrong. And, you know, I'm waiting up for Santa, but my brother says he's already here.
Yeah.
So the second she was telling that story, I just started cracking up, and I paused the movie. I had to pause the movie because I was cracking up so hard. And I looked over at my mom and started singing the song, and she was like cracking up too. And she's like, oh no, stop. You gotta start this movie.
Yeah, Kate's story is literally that song.
Yeah. It's really funny, and I don't know, like, because that's my reaction to it, but, like, I just kind of took it in general as being kind of a comically dark story for this movie in particular. You know, it's like, it's such a dark story to fit into this movie, which is kind of more, like, as I mentioned, the gremlins they might be doing homicidal things, but it's more, like, zany in tone
exactly.
than it
like
is,
I said, they're more, cartoon characters than trying to be frightening, you know, monsters, you know, like, again, tone of it, this isn't like it's trying to be like a chilling horror movie. It's like a zany horror comedy. You know, the tone of this is zany. Like the characters are zany, the monsters are zany. Like
they have this personality. It's so funny the way they like. There's a very like turning point scene that happens in the bar that Kate works at.
Yes.
Where like all the monsters are just kind of like pretend. They're basically like cosplaying as humans.
Yes, yeah, they're cosplaying as humans. It's great. There's like the one like they're doing the card game and like Stripe like shoots the other gremlin.
There's just all sorts of weird stuff. There's the guy wearing like the sunglasses that's like acting like a blues singer or something.
Yeah. It's fantastic. I mean, that's what makes it work is like those characters, they got a personality. They're memorable.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably the funniest thing about the movie is just kind of like it, and it feels almost like a hard turning point because the movie is like weird all throughout from the very beginning. It's weird. That opening scene with the father narrating about his invention and then going to the one is just weird.
Yeah, he's in Chinatown and you know, like there's the old Chinese man and like his grandson in that shop.
Yeah.
You know, like yeah.
It's just weird as hell.
And like him trying to like sell him like his invention.
Yeah.
Like just like sits there and like
going into way too much detail about it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a scene in a movie that's setting up to be about these gremlins, and like literally one of the first scenes in the movie is like 5 minutes of him explaining his bathroom invention.
Yes.
It's so weird. It's really funny, but it's so weird.
And also like Gizmo is an adorable and charming mascot for a film series.
Yeah. Voiced by Howie Mandel, by the way.
Yeah, Howie Mandel, yeah.
It's really funny because, as I was saying, the movie starts off weird. It's weird all the way throughout, but there's like a turning point at that bar scene where it's just like, what the fuck is going on?
I'd say, yeah, like, for me, again, like Edward Scissorhands, this is a unique film. Movies aren't made like this.
Yeah, like, I mean, we talked about this when we talked about like UHF, for example. It's like there's certain kinds of weird that were in movies quite often when we were growing up in the 80s and early 90s and stuff that are it's just like extinct. Like it just doesn't happen at all anymore. You know, you don't see a movie like UHF at all anymore. You don't see a movie like Gremlins at all anymore. You know, like they're just not like that. Like
it feels like movies are more focus tested.
Yeah, movies are nowadays. Like they're cleaner, but with like less personality. You know, they're more cleanly structured and articulate in that way, but they're not. They don't have as much personality because of that.
Yeah, and that's what I miss because like I would love this. Hell, I'd love a movie like even Gremlins too. You know, because people say what they want about it, but I love how they took this weird movie and they made it like even weirder and more bonkers. Like,
yeah, the whole fucking studio, and so they have the television studio, and so they had like the Gremlins doing a cooking show.
Oh,
and, like
and they gave the Gremlins superpowers. It's like,
so weird. Yeah, I should mention also there were a few cameos. We mentioned Judge Reinhold. We mentioned Corey Feldman being in these small roles. There's a few other ones that are notable. One that kind of just slapped me across the face when I saw it. I was like, what the fuck? Is Jonathan Banks.
Especially when you hear him talk.
Yeah.
It's like, yep, you know it.
Jonathan Banks, who's at that time was a kind of small-time actor. Now we know him as Mike from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and like he's instantly like iconically recognizable. But he'd been working for a long time before that.
Yeah,
it was just kind of unnoticed, really, you know?
Yeah, because he was a character actor. He did like, I don't know, like all the roles he did, like.
Very small parts though. He wasn't even like a major character actor, you know?
Right, yeah, exactly.
And so it's kind of like, what the hell? Like Mike's in this? And so watching that, and that's exciting. As I mentioned, Howie Mandel does the vocalizations for Gizmo. Another one to point out though is the guy who does the vocalizations for Stripe. When I was looking up for the show notes, that's Frank Welker.
Yes.
Some of the voices he did. Scooby-Doo, he did Fred. Megatron in Transformers, and Nibbler in Futurama.
Yes.
He's got a very, like, I think about, like, Nibbler's voice in Futurama, like, when he's not being all cute, when he's, like, actually speaking. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's, like, one of the most iconic voices in cartoons, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's just really cool. But yeah, Stripe is like, I like that Stripe is the kind of the villain leader of the group, and he has like that white mohawk. I like those kind of like, they would try to make villains or like these kind of antagonistic characters very instantly iconic in movies back then. And they do that a little bit now sometimes, but not nearly as much.
Yeah, making Stripe distinct from the other Gremlins at a glance. Yeah, that was really...
it was the big step in making things kind of iconic and really stand out. I think when people have kind of 80s nostalgia, a lot of it relates to that. Just the sense of things being very iconic. You know, like Back to the Future, you have like the DeLorean. You know, it's a very iconic symbol, you know?
And of course he had the special effects, like when Stripe dies, he like melts. He just turns into like this skeleton and this like puddle of like gremlin goo.
It's like bubbling, yeah. That's another thing that's interesting about this movie is that the effects work ranges from like terabad.
Yes. There's this one scene like where the gremlins are marching on.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to bring that up. It's like, it's horrible.
It's very clearly like the gremlins are stop motion and the town is a model set.
There's another scene it's not bad, but it's like an interesting technique that you don't see anymore. There's a scene where they're behind the movie screen and the gremlins realize them and start running up to like, you know, chase them down. Mm-hmm. And you just kind of see the shadows behind the movie screen of the gremlins approaching, and it's animated.
Yes.
It's like hand animated. And it reminds me like movies used to do that. Another good example of that would be like, the first Batman movie by Tim Burton. Like there's a scene where you see the shadow of Batman go across like the ground or something, and it was animated.
Yes.
They didn't want to just have like some shadow of a guy running there. They wanted it to have that mystique and that like, you know, dark look to it and that make it really kind of interesting and pop. And so they did that. That's not something you really see anymore, you know?
No, yeah.
Everything's kind of done more for like realism now, whereas before like you would have something like that scene in Batman or like with the gremlins approaching as silhouettes on this movie screen where it's like really done in this kind of like weird animated way that's really striking and interesting, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So I thought that was really cool. And then it ranges, like I said, even further. So you have like the really bad stuff. You have the really good, interesting kind of stuff that they don't do anymore. And then you have like the brilliant practical stuff, like Stripe dying, his death scene where he's like melting and stuff. It's like,
yes,
that's great practical effects.
Great, fantastic practical effects.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my pick. What do you think? Like I love the movie, obviously.
I forgot how weird it was.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoyed that. Like,
I love how weird this movie is. Like,
I mean, I knew it was weird, but like, I forgot how weird. I forgot that there's a 5-minute scene where at the very beginning of the movie where the father is explaining his invention, you know? These kind of like weird touches that just kind of like, what the hell?
Yeah.
This would never be in a movie these days. So
no,
the audience would be like,
never do that.
What the fuck is that? It's just kind of fascinating.
Especially for like something that's not at all important to the plot. You know, you talk about like Chekhov's gun, right? Which is if they show you something, you know, it's going to be important to a plot later on.
Yeah, you see the gun on the table, it's going to go off in the third act, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's good. Bathroom Buddy is shown at the beginning of the movie. It's never important. So yeah.
Exactly.
It's just flair to illustrate the eccentricity of the character.
So when I was putting together my notes for this, I came across something that I wanted to kind of throw in at the end for you, which you probably saw in my notes, and I don't know if you're even aware that this existed before. But did you know that next year there's a Gremlins animated prequel coming?
Oh yeah, Secrets of the Mogwai. Yeah, I heard about that.
It's got a crazy cast.
Oh really? Okay.
So I was taking down some notes just about this thing existing. I didn't know this thing existed. It's going to be coming, by the way, it was supposed to come this year, but it's coming next year on HBO Max and Cartoon Network. Amongst the cast, first off, Billy's returning. It's a prequel, but he's returning, so I'm guessing maybe he's telling a story or something. He's probably going to be part of a framing device for it.
Weird. Yeah.
I imagine. But in addition to that, Ming-Na Wen is in this from, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and The Mandalorian.
Oh, yeah.
Edie Wong, who was, what was it, White Swan, was it, in Mr. Robot?
Yeah.
Yeah, B.D. Wong's in this. Matthew Rhys, who was in The Americans and also in that new, I don't remember what it's called. Never mind.
Doesn't matter.
But he's kind of big. James Hong, who's kind of like the older Chinese actor that was like in every movie where they needed an old Chinese guy. Mm-hmm. He was in like Lethal Weapon. He was in like a bunch of other stuff. He's in it. And then the guest stars include Sandra Oh, Randall Park, George Takei, and Bowen Yang.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
So it's just this massive cast of like most of them Asian Americans.
Right. Yeah.
For this prequel about the Gremlins. So I had no idea that existed until I was doing research, looking up for show notes.
It could be fun.
Probably won't be great.
Probably
it
not.
Probably won't be weird.
I think it's aimed more at children than the movies were, so it's,
Unfortunately, so
probably,
is Gremlins. It could be aimed at children and still be weird, but unfortunately, I don't think it will be that weird.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So, but let's hope that Gremlins Secret of the Mogwai is weird as hell.
Yes, let's hope.
But that is it for this week's podcast. We're not going to be here for a while after this. We're going to be coming back at the very beginning of 2023. I believe that's around 4 weeks from the point that we're recording this. We're going to be recording our next episode, which is going to be a best of 2022 episode. So we're going to go through, we do this every year, where we cover the things that came out in 2022 that we liked, pick our winners, our awards for best performance, best drama, best movie, things like that. All those categories. So we're going to be doing that on our next episode. So stay tuned for that, but we're going to be gone through the holiday season and everything. And so since we're going to be gone that whole time, happy holidays, everybody, and have a great one. And we'll see you guys next year. But until then, you can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. Will is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our website, thetotalscreen.com. If you go to our website and open up any of the container stories for any of the podcasts, you can find all of the relevant links to our SoundCloud page, our Facebook, all that stuff. It's all in there. So that's where you can find it, on thetotalscreen.com. You can also look us up on your podcast client of choice, like Apple Podcasts or Pocket Cast. We should be available there. If you look up OnScreen, you should be able to find us. We're a pretty small podcast, so you might have to look around a little bit, but you should be able to find us. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen Podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.